If you're putting together a portfolio for your first job, I highly recommend working from professional concept art. You probably shouldn't be working from your own design unless you are very confident in what you're doing. Everyone wants to do something cool and original, but you don't want your model to suffer because the design wasn't as strong as it could have been. Pick something that is interesting, but also relevant to what employers expect to see. What you show in your portfolio reflects on your aesthetic, so you should choose wisely. In my case, I wanted to make a character along the lines of the Terra MMO. My criteria for this character was pretty simple: a sexy female character with a stylized and detailed art style and in a fantasy setting. With that in mind, my friend and coworker Herman Ing came up with these color thumbnails to help me narrow down a direction for the character. You can see here, this is the one I went along with in the end, kind of a necromancer magic user. There's these two knight slash warrior kind of characters. Here's a rogue or damage dealer, another wizard, and something like a healer. After that, I made some notes about things I liked about some of the other characters and what I thought he could maybe add. And he came up with this color thumbnail, kind of narrowing down the color scheme and a few more little details before going into more detailed line work orthographic views. This is actually kind of a luxury. A lot of times 3D character artists don't get orthographic views. It's not always necessary, but it definitely helps, especially with a character like this where there was a lot of detail in the end, and you don't want to be sitting there noodling around trying to figure it out on your own in 3D. It's just way faster to concept it out in 2D. Here are the colored concepts. You see, we went through some variations with the staff here. I kind of went with a combination of the two, taking elements of both. And here are some poses. Another thing that isn't really common, but it helps to sell the personality of the character and what kind of things that the character might end up be doing. This is the pose that is probably most close to what I ended up going with in the end. But yeah, it's good to have some ideas early on how you might want to present the character later on. After researching some mythology, I came across Hel, or Hela, the Norse goddess of the dead, who is said to have been born with a half-decayed body. The more I read about her, the more I thought she was a good choice to center this character around, even if it wasn't, a direct representation. You can see the things right here growing from her back. I thought it was kind of an interesting parallel. Instead of being physically split in half, decayed, maybe she's decayed on the inside, and this is kind of it manifesting itself externally right here. There's also some other interesting details, like this bag, which is kind of like a creature in itself. We kind of thought it'd be cool if maybe she captures souls or something like that, and maybe she stores it in that guy's mouth. Who knows? Those kind of ideas, they don't always come across in the final model, but I think having that in mind while you're working, it helps solidify the character, and that kind of thing. It always helps the artistic process a little bit, sometimes in ways that you can't really measure, but it's always there. And the more of that kind of thing you have in the end, I think it strengthens the overall feeling of the piece. After just deciding on what you want to make, you should really examine your concept art again. What is it about that concept that you think is most important to capture in 3D. Sometimes the feeling that you want is actually more of an impression that is hinted at in the picture than anything that's really defined. Ask yourself why you decided to work on this character, and if those qualities are what would make it interesting for other people who are looking at your work. In this case, I was drawn to the Dark Sorceress kind of a look because it wasn't something I had really done before. I could imagine that she's kind of cold but seductive, and there were a lot of details in her outfit that I thought kind of suggested a culture that she might belong to, even though there is no real explanation for it. I mean, this is just going to be a 3D model. There's no actual game or lore to it. But, you know, you could see some design language going on in the Curly's designs, and, you know, these runes in her hair, and, you know, it all suggests something. And the design itself, it follows enough familiar conventions that I think most of us, at least most gamers, can probably guess who and what she is just from looking at her. This kind of silhouette, using a staff, it pretty much says magic user or some kind of wizard to me. But at the same time, there's enough unique to it, you know, kind of like this little dude on her side, and, you know, things in her hair, this thing coming out of her back. There's enough going on that's different, that it makes her strong enough to stand on her own, even amongst other characters of this type. I mean, she's definitely not just a female Gandalf, for example. I like to have these kind of goals in my mind when I'm working, because I think that's the key to bringing a character to life in 3D. Just knowing what you really want to play up when you make the 3D model, what's most important to translate, because the purity of the idea will always be diluted when you go from 2D to 3D. So you always want to make sure that the key parts of the model, or of the design, get translated. And once you get things into 3D, you know, the believability and the dimensionality of the model will hopefully bring it back, and maybe even beyond what the original concept was. We'll get into specifics a little later, but we should take another look at the concept and think about how to build this. I mean, I already built it here, but I decided to build just about everything separately, except for the form-fitting, you know, corset, the choker, the underwear, the boots. They're all kind of stuck together in there. But, you know, things like the hair is separate, the jacket, the gloves, the skirt, and obviously the staff in this guy back here, and this thing. But it's important to think about how the final low poly model will be constructed, because that will kind of affect how you decide to build the high res model. I also made the decision early on that this character would use mostly mirrored textures. I know a lot of high resolution characters, though, they would uniquely unwrap both sides of the body, so that way you could kind of paint asymmetrical details. That's not something that I really cared about too much for this character. I mean, the only thing that's really asymmetrical about her right now is the hair, maybe. I actually allotted a lot of UV space to these feathers. I think each one has its own UV space. That was mostly because I wanted to paint in some subtle gradients, and maybe even make some feathers unique from each other. In the end, it didn't really work out quite as I expected. I probably could have use the same feather everywhere, to be honest. And if I were to do it again, I probably would have done that and maybe scaled up some other areas in the UV space. I'm using different shaders for different parts of the model. Almost every single one of these pieces, well, that's not true. There's the clothing, there's the skin, there's the hair, there's a staff, there's this guy back here, and the eye. They all have their own texture and their own shader. When you're building your own model, you might want to consolidate this as much as possible. I didn't really care too much about this because I knew this was just going to be a showpiece basically. But for example, in my day job, most of the models I make just use one texture and one shader. So, performance is definitely something to keep in mind when you're working. Although for your portfolio, I would probably say that the quality of the model is more important. You want people to get attracted to your model first and foremost, and you want to prove that you can make a good model, because that's kind of the hard part. Getting it to work in the game, that's all technical stuff and can be more easily taught.